A big hello, namaste to my dear students. So we'll be discussing the competency today, PY 10.6, describe and discuss spinal cord, its functions, lesion and sensory disturbances. When we were having live sessions, we have already discussed the spinal cord in detail, its structure, its different laminae, its different horns, and also the function, sensory as well as motor. We have discussed many sensory disturbances also, but now today I'll be focusing only mainly the lesions, which are the like injuries to the spinal cord, mainly the transections or injuries to the spinal cord with some reference to some of the lesions and a recall of the sensory lesions. We'll just go through again the specific learning objectives. We'll revise the specific learning objectives. So the first one is describe the gross physiological anatomy of spinal cord. We already discussed this in detail. Then second one is outline the functions of spinal cord correctly. That is, the student should be able to outline the functions of spinal cord correctly. What are its sensory functions? What are its motor functions? So we talked in detail of different tracts, ascending tracts and descending tracts, and especially the ascending tracts, different laminae. We talked of this. Then enumerate and discuss different motor neuron cells present in the spinal cord accurately. We also discussed in detail the alpha motor neurons, the gamma motor neurons, and all the other relevant structures there. Then next is comprehend the distribution of different spinal laminae like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, starting from the posterior to the anterior lamina. Then next is outline the physiological distribution of white matter in the spinal cord appropriately. That is its distribution into anterior horn, the posterior horn, the lateral horn, and intermediate lateral horn, especially in certain areas where the autonomic nervous system is present. We discussed this in detail. Then next is enumerate different ascending and descending tracts traversing the spinal cord. We discussed in detail the different ascending tracts, the posterior column tracts, the tract of Gall, tract of Burdock, the spinothalamic tracts, then the also the different spinocerebellar tracts, and then we also discussed talked of different descending tracts, and some descending tracts we talked in as part of the different competency like reticulospinal tracts. Then in another competency, while discussing the vestibular apparatus, the vestibulospinal tract was discussed. Then talking about the motor system, we talked of the different other descending tract like corticospinal tracts. So they were discussed in detail, and then discussed the different ascending and descending tracts traversing the spinal cord correctly. So initially, the earlier objective means you just know the names. At least you should know the names. So you should know the what are the different tracts, and then here we need to know the details of the tract. Then correct understanding of motor functions of spinal cord. So we again discussed this in detail. What are the motor functions of the spinal cord? And in another competency, we also discussed last lecture discussed the motor functions. In another competency, discussed the different reflexes also. Then enumerate different sensory disturbances related to spinal cord correctly. We discussed this in detail and already discussed in detail. Then explain different sensory disturbances related to spinal cord accurately. That will be discussed in detail. Rather, you people discussed with me in detail. Then identify lesions of spinal cord accurately and relate the outcome of spinal lesions with its physiology. So in today's this lecture, we will mainly concentrating on the lesions of the spinal cord, injuries of the spinal cord, and then outcome of the spinal lesions, and we will try to relate the cause of this spinal lesion, what is the physiological basis of these effects which are produced because of the spinal. Coming to one of the important lesion is effect of posterior spinal root transection. That is whenever there is any injury to the posterior spinal root, or what we call as deafferentation or dorsal nerve root lesion. So we know that the posterior or the dorsal spinal root is sensory. It carries the afferent uh, sensations or the afferent impulses. So it means whenever there is injury to this spinal root, mainly the sensations will be lost, mainly the afferent supply to the spinal cord will be lost. So the effects encountered are the following, and the deficit depends upon the number of root cuts. More the number of roots cut, more is a deficit. If there is lesser, a number of roots are cut, but because of overlapping of dermatomes, the loss is not that much. But if more and more roots are cut, then we get the uh, major effects. So first of all, what we get is loss of sensation in area supplied by the involved roots, because these are the afferent roots. So whatever sensation comes from different parts of the body, it comes via the posterior root. So there is no sensation, no impulses from the receptor reach the spinal cord, so we lose the sensation. We don't feel any sensation. So if there is a loss of one or two roots, what happens? Because of overlapping of dermatomes, there is no effect on the sensation. That is, we don't lose the sensation if the one or two roots are cut, because there is overlapping of dermatomes. But if three or four roots are cut, then we see some sensory loss. That is, the more the roots are cut, the major result is loss of sensation. So the next effect is hypotonia or atonia. That is, when few roots are cut, what will you see in the muscles? The tone of the muscles is decreased, and this is known as hypotonia. When all the roots are cut or the major roots are cut, what will happen? There is absence of tone in the muscles, and this is known as atonia. Then another effect is hyporeflexia or areflexia. Here what is happening? Both the superficial and the deep reflexes are affected. If few fibers are cut, we get hyporeflexia, and all the fibers are cut, we get the areflexia. So you should be very clear. This is different from upper motor neuron paralysis. Here both the superficial as well as the deep reflexes are affected. Then the sensory ataxia. Ataxia means what? Ataxia means incoordinate movements. That is, the movements are not coordinated. That is complete chaos of movements. So here the ataxia is known as sensory ataxia. Why we call it sensory ataxia? Because here there is no paralysis of muscles, but still you get ataxia, still you get the incoordination of the movements. Why does this incoordination of the movement occurs? Why does it occur? Because like whenever a muscle contracts, the contraction is smooth, even though the impulses which are coming from the higher centers or from the lower centers, it comes in a burst. That is, there is a intermittent sort of impulses, they come in bursts. But the smoothness of movement, but what we get is, we don't get the interrupted movements. What you do? You are writing, you are drinking, or you are walking. You don't write stop, you don't write stop, or you don't walk stop on your own. But what happens is that there is, when you start walking, when you plan to walk, you keep on walking. When you plan to write, you keep on writing. So there is smoothness of movement, and this depends upon the sensory feedback from the moving parts of the body, like the muscles, joint, etc. They sort of send a feedback to the spinal cord, and your movements, they are smoothened. In the loss of posterior root section, or in the posterior root section is cut, what is there? There is loss of sensory feedback from the moving parts. So there is incoordination and there is ataxia. So that is why the term is sensory ataxia, because there is no paralysis, no motor involved. Another important effect of the posterior root section is, what you see is trophic changes. That is what you in this, whenever a part or area of body loses sensation, because here what is there is anesthetic areas, that loss of sensation means anesthesia. We have already read about anesthesia, and so anesthetic areas or parts show trophic changes or disturbances which can result in ulceration and destruction of the part. Why there is this is due to loss of pain sensation. So what happens is, suppose there is no sensation, the sensations are lost, and anything breaks or injures the patient, he doesn't know. And what happens, the wound starts, there is ulceration and destruction of the part, and this is one of the very important changes which we see in the posterior root section. Now let us discuss another important lesion or injury to the spinal cord, that is anterior spinal root section. So we will be discussing the effect of anterior spinal root section. Why these injuries can occur either to the anterior root or the spinal root. So this can occur whenever there is accidental injuries or gunshot wounds, trauma, fall, or this nerve root compression by the prolapsed disc. So any sort of trauma or fall, or any there is tumor, that it specifically affects either the posterior root or the anterior root. Posterior root we discussed, now we're talking of the anterior root. Now we know that anterior or the ventral root is the motor, that is, it is the efferent part, while the posterior root was the afferent part. Again, the deficits which we'll be seeing depend upon the number of roots cut. More the number of roots cut, more will be the defects which we'll be seeing. Now just imagine the anterior root, the motor part. So what sort of defect will you see? Just try to recollect. So it will be same as the lower motor neuron lesion, because what is happening there? The contact of the effectors with the anterior with the motor neuron in the anterior horns, alpha gamma neurons, is lost. So what we see is the effect is same as the lower motor neuron lesion. We have already discussed in detail, but I'll be revising this. First of all is paresis or paralysis. Paresis is weakness and paralysis is complete loss of movements. So the weakness or loss of movements of the muscle, it all depends upon the number of root cut. Let us take an example of quadriceps femoris muscle. Quadriceps muscle has a nerve supply L234. When all these fibers are cut, what we get is paralysis. But if only one, let us take an example, only the L2 fibers are cut, what will we get? Will we get the weakness. So the muscle will not be completely paralyzed, but it will be weak. So quadriceps muscle will be weak, and then the extension of the knee will be affected. But if the whole of the nerve supply is cut, then what we get is that the muscle becomes totally paralyzed. Second feature what we see is hypotonia, that is decrease in the tone, or atonia. Again depends upon the number of roots cut. Lesser the roots, maybe you get hypotonia, and major roots or more roots cut, complete loss of tone. So this is due to interruption of the reflex arc, and we know the reflex arc is interrupted, obviously there will be no tone in the muscles. This is again a feature of a lower motor neuron paralysis. Then hyporeflexia or areflexia, again depending upon the roots cut. Then another very important feature of this is atrophy of the muscles, that is the muscles, they are decrease in size or they are reduce in size, and finally the muscles may be replaced by the fibrous tissue. So why does this occur? Just give it a thought. Why does it occur? So why? Let me explain. The intact motor nerve is important for nutritive and functional integrity of the muscles, because there are number of trophic factors released by the nerve, so which is important for nutritive and functional integrity of the muscle. So when there is long-standing denervation of the muscle, there is both what is happening to the muscle, both nutritive and functional loss is there. Muscle is not moving, it is paralyzed, and moreover the nutritive input via the nerve is also lost. So finally what happens to the muscle is there is disuse atrophy. Disuse atrophy because you're not using the muscle, so the stimulus to the muscle to contract is lost and muscle doesn't repair itself, rather it decreases in size, and finally a stage will come when the muscle is completely replaced by a fibrous tissue, and such sort of muscle is generally remains in a contracted state, and the muscle is replaced by fibrous tissue which do not have the contractile elements like actin and myosin. So such type of muscle is not going to contract. Another very much important effect of the lesion or cutting of the anterior root, spinal root is reaction of degeneration. These are the reaction or electrical responses or changes in the electrical response of the denervated degenerating muscles, the muscle which is denervated and starts degenerating. So the degenerating muscle shows this responses until unless it is replaced by a fibrous tissue. Another very important effect is seen on the chronexy. So what happens to the chronexy? Chronexy is what? Chronexy is the time taken by the excitable tissue to contract when the stimulus strength is double that of the Rio base. So chronexy is the duration of time which is there when you use the stimulus strength which is double that of the Rio base. Okay. So in this case, and chronexy is inversely related to excitability. That is, if more the chronexy, less is the excitability. Okay, less the chronexy, more is the excitability. We have learned from the past experiences that the nerve has this smaller chronexy. Our nerve tissues are more excitable. So here the chronexy is different from that of the muscles. So based on this, we plot a strength duration curve. We will not be discussing the strength duration curve. I'm just giving the examples. So here the excitability is less. So chronexy is prolonged. In the muscles, already the chronexy is prolonged as compared to the nerves, because in the nerves the chronexy is shorter as compared to muscles and they have the greater excitability as compared to the muscles. But here the chronexy is further prolonged than the normal normal muscle which is being innervated. So here the prolonged chronexy is there with less excitability and the threshold is also higher. Another very important feature of this is that the muscle shows no response to Faraday current. Faraday current is the alternating current or the induced current. So normally your muscle is more responsive to Faraday current, and while it is less responsive to galvanic current or the direct current. So here the muscle does not respond to the Faraday current, but it shows a weak response to galvanic current, that is the direct current, and this is called as writhing worm-like response. Like the worm moves, writhes, like nowadays it's rainy season, you can see a worm moving around. It moves with the writhing movement, slimy movements, writhing movements. So same sort of response is seen, and another feature is that this strength duration curve shifts to right. This is of normal nerve, and let us take an example. This is a denervated muscle. Here it shifts to right. So chronexy is prolonged, excitability is less, normal might be here, and this is very important. What are the other features, what are the other components of this reaction of degeneration? We will be discussing this. Another feature of reaction of this degeneration is fibrillation potential. Degenerating muscle shows small spontaneous potentials of approximately 0.1 millivolt. We can see this small potentials. We have already discussed this when we discussed the electromyography. We discussed this. So a small spontaneous potentials of approximately 0.1 millimolt can be seen occurring at irregular intervals. This is due to regular intervals. This is due to the uh, individual muscle fiber contraction in response to minute quantities of neurotransmitter released. In a normal innervated muscle, the random release of neurotransmitter will cause no response, but a denervated muscle becomes hypersensitive, what we call as denervation hypersensitivity. Here the receptors are widespread and there is upgrading of receptors, and the now muscle becomes hypersensitive and shows the fibrillation potentials, and this will show the fibrillation potentials until unless the muscle is atrophied. It is the response of the individual muscle fibers, not the motor unit or the group of the muscle fibers. Fibrillation potential are of different types, like spike form, positive wave form, and then positive wave form from a spike form. See, this is a spike form, this is a wave form, then here is the positive wave form from the spike form. So this is again the recorded with the EMG. Then another very important thing is that the muscle becomes, a degenerating muscle becomes more responsive to a nodal current than the cathodal current. A normal muscle is more responsive to the cathodal current as compared to the anodal current. But a degenerating muscle becomes more responsive to the anodal current than the cathodal current. What do you mean by this is, let us see, this is a muscle. Here the cathode is the stimulating electrode, and here the anode is the stimulating electrodes. In a normal muscle, so let us first see what is ACC and what is KCC. KCC is the current flowing through the muscle when the stimulating electrode is nearer to the muscle is cathode. So what is KCC? So KCC is the current flowing through the muscle when the stimulating electrode near the muscle is the cathode, and when the stimulating electrode is anode, then we called it as ACC. So KCC is cathodal closing current and AOC is anodal opening current, KOC is cathodal opening current, and ACC is the anodal closing current. So KCC and ACC are at the make. So when we start the circuit at the make, and when we stop the circuit at the break, we get the AOC or the KOC. Okay. So in a normal muscle, the KCC, the cathodal closing. Why we are starting it with K? Because in Germany it was cathode was started with K, so we kept on doing that. We started abbreviating the cathode as K. We never changed it. So here cathodal closing current is greater than the anodal closing current. I am talking of a normal muscle, not the denervated muscle. And further, the anodal closing current is greater than the anodal opening current, which is further greater than the cathodal opening current. This is in a normal muscle. Then what happens in a degenerated muscle? In a degenerated muscle, reverse is there. Here the muscle becomes more responsive to this anode. Here the ACC is greater than the KCC. What do you mean by this? These are so like jumbling terms, like mouth twisting terms, ACC, KCC. So what do you mean by this? Why are we talking of this specifically? The current needed for contraction is less with anode when the anode is being the stimulating electrode as compared to the current when needed for contraction when the cathode is the stimulating electrode. That is, the muscle will be easily stimulated when we are using anode as the stimulating electrode as compared to the cathode, which is the stimulating electrode. So muscle is better responsive to the anodal current than the cathodal current. So I am clear now. So reaction of degeneration, chronexia is prolonged, excitability is less, nerve muscle is more responsive to galvanic current as compared to Faraday current, though it's a weaker response, but still the muscle is more responsive to galvanic current. Then the degenerating muscle shows the fibrillation potentials. Then it is more responsive to anodal current than the cathodic current. Am I clear? Now coming to a very important topic is spinal cord transection. Transection means cutting of this. We are talking of spinal cord when it is transect or cut or interrupted. So this transection can be complete. That is, there is complete transverse sections of the spinal cord. That is complete dissociation of the spinal cord from the higher centers, or it can be incomplete transection. That is, there is severing of the spinal cord connection with the higher centers, but some connection is still being maintained. Then another is hemisection of the cord, that is, the spinal cord is completely cut at the by half. That is, whole complete transection is not there. It's not even incomplete. We can call it incomplete, but it is this is sort of incomplete transection only. But here what is happening, that clear cut one side of the cord is completely dissociated from the higher centers. Complete transection of the spinal cord, that is, the spinal cord is completely transected. So this transection, there is what happens, there is sudden complete transection of the spinal cord. This can also be produced experimentally. I talked of this when we discussed the spinal reflexes, that spinal animal can be produced, that is, preparation of animal by cat or dog generally are used. So here we experimentally cut the cord below the level of medulla. So what we do, in certain times we cut below the cervical region so that the diaphragmatic supply is maintained, so that here the respiration is maintained, so we don't need to maintain the respiration of the animal. Or sometimes even the lower centers, transection is done in the lower center so that the cardiovascular supply is maintained. So that again the cardiovascular supply is not affected. Excuse me. So this was about the spinal animal, but I'm talking if there is any injury or in a human being, why there is complete transection of the spinal cord. Here what will happen, all cord functions below the level of transection will be depressed. What are the common causes? It can be due to trauma like the person falls, he slips down, he falls, or there can be gunshot injuries, blast injuries. Dislocation of spine can occur, and spine can injure the spinal cord. The vertebral column can injure the spinal cord. The person can land up in car accidents, or there can be sport injuries, etc. So any sort of trauma, or it can be non-traumatic. Without any trauma, still the spinal cord transection occurs. Complete occlusion of the blood vessels which are supplying the part of the spinal cord, or there can be infection. Because of the infection, the spinal cord loses its contact with the higher center, or there can be tumor. This tumor completely dissociates the spinal cord from the higher center. So due to any reason, the transection. So clinically, how will you see this spinal cord transection? So what are the features or signs and symptoms of this spinal cord transection? Now, these features, it depends upon, it is divided in roughly 3 stages or phases. First is stage or phase of spinal shock. Second is stage or phase of recovery. After the spinal shock, recovery starts occurring, what we call as stage or phase of recovery. Then sometimes the recovery may not occur if the patient is not managed. The patient lands up in the third stage, which is a stage of phase or phase of reflex failure. Reflexes fail, then the patient deteriorates and the person can even die. So let us talk of first the stage 1, stage or phase of spinal shock. This stage is also known as stage of flaccidity. Why we call it this? Because the muscles are flaccid. Here there is cessation of all the functions below the level of transection. It all depends upon the level of transection where the injury occurs. So the symptoms and sign will depend upon the level of transection. While we see whatever features we are going to discuss in the spinal shock, what is the reason of this shock? Why the loss of all the functions in the spinal cord? Why does it occur? Because the normal spinal cord activity or the motor neuronal activity depends upon the continual tonic impulses coming from the higher centers. We have discussed this in detail, that what are different facilitatory inhibitory impulses coming to the alpha motor neuron, the gamma motor neuron, especially the reticulospinal tract, the vestibulospinal tract and the corticospinal tract. So there is final effect is the algebraic summation of these effects. So in nutshell, what happens? The sensitivity of spinal neurons is less and the threshold is high. Why? Why does it occur? Because when you are completely being affected, let us take an example, when you are completely being guided or when you are completely being fed with the knowledge or completely fed with something, with the knowledge or with any information, you don't want to seek the information. You don't want to do on your own. You become lazy. And once this information stops coming to you, there is first some inertia. Suddenly you don't respond. And then after some time you start responding. Because now you tend to regain your own learning function or the function of the brain by which you want to attain the information. Same is case with the spinal neurons. The spinal motor neurons are being dominated or affected like in the pacemaker of the heart, like SA node affects the other uh, pacemakers of the heart or the excitable tissue of the heart. Here also it is dominated by the higher centers. They are modulating its effect. So the spinal neurons, their sensitivity is less and the threshold is high. So finally a stage comes in the spinal shock that suddenly this effect is totally lost. The spinal neurons, for some time they remain in the state of shock, rather sort of inertia, and then they come out of that shock and start producing the effects. So we'll be discussing this. What are the clinical features of this spinal shock? It all depends upon the site of injury. So depending upon the site of injury, at what level the spinal cord is transected. It can be transected at the just below the medulla or below the C5, 6, 7 or at the any thoracic level or at the lumbar level or at the sacral level. So it all depends. The more higher the transection, more will be the effects. So when there is complete transection, for example, complete transection in the cervical region, uh, above the C5 level, it is fatal. Why it is fatal? Can somebody start thinking? Please try to recollect. Why? Because the cutting of connections between respiratory center and the muscles of respiratory muscles leading to paralysis of respiratory muscles. So the respiratory center which controls the respiratory muscles, its connection to the respiratory muscles is lost. So the person can die. It becomes fatal. So when cord is suddenly transected completely, what happens to the patient? Patient feels as he have been cut into two portions. Above the injury, which is not affected, but the whole body below the level of injury is deprived of all the sensations and motor activity. He thinks that he is split into two. At upper part he is feeling something else and the lower part is not feeling anything. So first of all, the effect is what changes occur, what motor changes we can see is the motor effects is the part below the lesion. We see the lower motor neuron type of paralysis below the level of injury. We've already discussed when we discussed this lower motor neuron paralysis. Also we revised during when the anterior horn is cut, anterior root is cut. So there is flaccid paralysis and there can be paraplegia when only the upper when only the lower limbs are affected, paralyzed, or there can quadriplegia when all the four limbs are affected. Again, it depends upon the site of transaction. More higher the lesion, more is the effect. Then there is areflexia, and both here superficial and deep reflexes are lost. the tone is then not there, hypotonia or atonia is there, and because the alpha motor, because higher centers are not sending impulses and alpha motor neurons fail to respond to afferent input for the time being. This is for the time being. This is in the spinal shock. Then further, what happens? Then the sensory effects, what we see in this is that it is complete anesthesia, that is loss of all sensations below the transection. We can see the sensations like these posterior column tract sensations, the spinothalamic tract sensations, all will be lost, complete transection. So complete loss of sensation. So there is complete anesthesia. Then we can see that there is autonomic disturbances also. The autonomic reflexes are lost, and the autonomic reflexes like this micturition reflex, the bowel reflex, they are all lost. Then vasomotor effects, what we see is that like this transection of cord below the L1 level. L1 segment will produce no effect or little fall in blood pressure. It all depends upon the level of the cut. So connection with vasomotor scent is cut off depending upon the level of cut. So sympathetic vasoconstrictor fibers between the T1 and L2 are affected. But if the cut is below L2, these vasoconstrictor fibers will not be affected. So when this is there, the connection of vasomotor center to the thoracolumbar sympathetic cord is not there. So the continuous sympathetic tonic discharge to the vessel, smooth muscle vessels is lost, and there is arterial dilatation. Arterial dilatation leads to decrease in blood pressure, and mean blood pressure can decrease to about 40 millimeters of mercury. From 100 to 40 millimeters of mercury, the blood pressure can decrease. And a very important feature is that there is absence of muscle movements. So muscle is paralyzed, so muscles can't move. So this further decreases the venous return. Already the sympathetic tone is less, the arterial dilatation occurs, there is decrease in blood pressure, and venous return is also decreased, and again because of absence of muscle movements, the venous return is decreased. So this leads to cyanotic extremities, mainly the peripheral cyanosis. Peripheral cyanosis will be seen, the limbs will be cold and blue limbs. It's not central cyanosis, it is a peripheral cyanosis. So skin can become dry and scaly, and even the patient can develop decubitus ulcers or bed sores can be developed. Then a very important interesting fact is that these non-contracting muscles cannot generate heat, so the body temperature falls. So what we do is, we sometimes, the attendants or the relatives, what they do, they keep hot bottles because the patient is not feeling anything, and moreover his sensations, there are no sensations in the limb. Suppose we talk, there are low limbs are affected, there are no sensations, he's not able to feel any sensations. Moreover, the muscles are not contracting, so he's not able to generate the heat, so body easily loses temperature. So what the attendant does, he takes a hot bottle in the cold climate, he takes a hot bottle, keeps near his her legs, and remember, he is lacking sensations. So sometimes there can be severe burn injuries can be there because of this. We have seen this clinically in the patients. Then another very important feature is we can see certain visceral effects. Visceral effects is that we talked that blood pressure is affected. This is also a visceral effect. Then sacral reflexes for control of bladder and colon evacuation are completely stressed. So the bladder becomes full, bowel becomes full, the colon becomes full. Urine accumulates in urinary bladder, and when it is full, it starts dribbling. So this is known as retention with overflow incontinence. When you cannot control, it flows, it is incontinence, you cannot control. And it is overflow incontinence, means there are two types of continences. Incontinence is when even with the bladder is not full, still the person leaks urine. That is simply incontinence. But when the bladder fulls, then only he starts passing urine or dribble, this is known as overflow incontinence. In this case, the patient shows overflow incontinence. Even the constipation can occur in such patients. The internal vesical sphincter as well as internal anal sphincter, they both are affected. So if lesion is at T6 level, all impulses coming in from the abdominal viscera are cut from the brain. So what will happen? Whenever there is distension of viscera or gripping sensation, which normally you appreciate, the distension of viscera or gripping sensation, when you want to micturate, you have that gripping sensation. When you want to pass that stools, you have that distension sensation. That is completely lost in this case. And the very important feature is that in males, the penis becomes flaccid and shows no erection. Then what is the duration of spinal shock? A patient will remain in spinal shock for how much duration? This is variable. It depends upon the level of animal in the evolutionary scale. We are talking that suppose we compare the spinal shock in an animal and in a human, the duration in the animals will be less as compared to humans. This depends upon the evolutionary scale. So higher the animal in evolutionary scale, longer the duration of shock. So cause is it is due to telencephalization, that is, as we ascend in the evolutionary scale, higher centers take over the functions of lower centers. Like the smaller animals like rat, the higher centers do not have that much role. Then as we ascend, the cat, dog, this monkeys. So finally the human beings. So human beings have the longest duration of spinal shock. The resting membrane potential of this spinal neurons is increased by 2 to 6 millivolt, and these neurons, they are less excitable. This is very important feature. As I was telling you that the recovery from the shock or the duration of shock depending upon the level of telencephalization or encephalization. So in frogs, which is the lowest in the as far as evolutionary scale is concerned, duration is hardly 1 to 2 minutes. In mammals like cats and dogs, hardly 1 to 2 days. In primates like monkeys, 1 to 2 weeks. In humans, 2 to 6 weeks. You can easily remember the lowest animal, frog, 1 to 2 minutes. Cats and dogs, 1 to 2 days, from minutes to days. Then in primates like monkeys, days to weeks. And in humans, from 2 to 6 weeks. 2 to 6 weeks. Now the recovery occurs after a variable duration. As I told you, it depends upon the duration, and it also depends upon the support or the of the patient. Like it doesn't occur all the in a human being in which there is spinal injury, we have to maintain the respiration, we have to maintain the cardiovascular system, we have to maintain the posture, keep on changing his posture. Otherwise what will happen? He can develop those ulcers. We have to maintain the nutrition. So everything has to be maintained. So a recovery occurs in all those persons who are properly managed. Recovery might also occur in all those patients who are not being managed, who are not being aided, but still the extent of recovery will be affected and they will not be recovered to completely. So recovery, why does this recovery occurs? Recovery occurs because the spinal neurons recover gradually, regaining their excitability. In the central nervous system, what happens if there is injury? There is permanent loss, because there is in the central nervous system, the neuron, they do not regenerate. Because of the lack of regeneration, there is no regeneration. So in the CNS, there is permanent loss due to lack of the regeneration. Now what are the reasons of recovery? I told you the spinal motor neurons regain their excitability. So what are the reason is denervation hypersensitivity of spinal neurons below the level of lesion. So there can be increase in the number of receptors in a denervated cell, so they become more excitable. So as the spinal neurons, they lose their source of facilitatory impulses from higher centers, they start increasing their own natural degree of excitability to make up for their loss. So what they do is there occurs increase in number of receptors in the denervated cells. So they become more excitable now. And the neurotransmitter amount may also increase. Another very important reason is that there may be sprouting of multiple new nerve endings in the spinal cord. Sprouting, that is branching. Intact branches, intact neurons may give collaterals to the other injured branches. So the sprouting and as well as the intact branches giving collaterals to the injured branches can lead to the excitability. Then the stage or phase of recovery. After the spinal shock, if the patient survives, the stage of spinal shock gradually finishes off and the stage of recovery occurs. So depending upon the health of the patient, recovery takes place in isolated segments of spinal cord below the level of lesion. First of all, the recovery of visceral reflexes occur. The first to recover, visceral reflex activity to recover is the micturition reflex. There is automatic, the urinary bladder becomes automatic and such type of bladder is called as spastic neurogenic bladder. So, but here there is no voluntary control. Here the bladder when becomes full, it evacuates. But here there is no voluntary control. So we can train such a patient. We scratch the mid side of the thigh and then automatically the micturition will occur. So we can train such sort of patient. Bladder, but the problem here is that the bladder capacity is decreased as the muscles are hypertrophied. Reflex defecation is also established. Here the coitus reflex is also there, can occur, but the complete intercourse is not possible. Then second to recover is the tone of blood vessels, because the smooth muscle tone is recovered. The connector, why does this occur? Because connector neurons of the spinal cord, they recover. Initially they were being controlled by the vasomotor centers, but now the control is lost. So the intermediolateral horn neurons, so the connector neurons of the spinal cord, they start acting as the motor centers. They act independently. It starts sending impulses to the smooth muscles of the blood vessels. So the tone of the blood vessels is maintained and the blood pressure starts returning to normal. Very important aspect is that skin also starts becoming healthy. Initially, if it was dry and scaly, then it becomes healthy. The sweating again starts occurring, and another important feature, if there are bed sores and if they are taken care of, the patient heals. Then next to recover is the skeletal muscle tone. After the recovery of the smooth muscle tone, the recovery of skeletal muscle tone occurs. Now, which muscles are the first to gain their tone? It is the flexor muscle. So first to recover its tone is the flexor muscles. Then they are followed by the recovery of the extensor muscles. Now, very important thing is that here there is no wasting of muscle doesn't occur. Why wasting doesn't occur? Because here although the muscles are paralyzed, but reflex activity is maintained. So there is no wasting of muscles. So this flexor muscle tone is followed by the recovery of the extensor muscle tone with appearances of extensor spasms. Then one aspect you have to understand is here that the flexor muscle tone is always greater than the extensor muscle tone at any point of time. Although the extensor muscle tone is recovered, but still the flexor muscle tone is always greater at any point than the extensor. A very important interesting feature is that in these persons, when they are gaining their tone back and recovering the tone back, the paralyzed limb attains a typical posture. It remains in a flexed position. Because the flexor, if you remember, I told you the flexor tone is more as compared to the extensor tone. So what is predominant? So like flexor takes over, it dominates, that I am the major one. So let me keep the muscles in a flexed position. So the paralyzed limb remains in a flexed position. So both limbs are paralyzed. Suppose both the limbs, lower limbs are affected. So we'll say both limbs are paralyzed and it is called as paraplegia in flexion. If all the four limbs are paralyzed, we call it as quadriplegia. If half of the body is paralyzed, we call it as hemiplegia. If only one of the limb is paralyzed, we call it as monoplegia. Mono is single, hemi is half, quadri is 4, para is like 2. So paraplegia. Then very important aspect is that spinal person's limbs are not strong enough to support the body weight. So the spinal person who is recovering cannot still support his body weight, although the flexor tone is recovered, extensor tone is recovered, but still his muscles are not, limbs are not able to support. Next, recovering are the somatic reflexes. So now the somatic reflexes, after the visceral reflexes, the tone of the muscles, then the smooth muscle tone, the skeletal muscle tone, there is recovery of the somatic reflexes. And first of all, the first reflex to recover is the flexor withdrawal reflex or the flexor reflex. It is the protective reflex. So this is the first to appear, and also there is Babinski sign is positive. Babinski sign is positive, and the patient shows the features of upper motor neuron lesion. Upper motor neuron lesion features will be, there will be hypertonia, hyperreflexia, and then there is hypertonia, hyperreflexia. So all these features along with the Babinski sign. Next to appear is the extensor reflexes. Extensor reflexes, they appear in 1 to 5 weeks, after 1 to 5 weeks of the uh, appearance of the flexor withdrawal or flexor reflexes. And these stretch reflexes, they are weaker as compared to flexor reflexes. First to appear is the knee jerk and then the ankle jerk. First to appear is the knee jerk followed by the ankle jerk. After some time, these reflexes become exaggerated. I told you that you have the features of upper motor neuron lesion. So there is hyperreflexia or the exaggerated spinal reflexes with hypertonia, and Babinski sign is positive. All the features of upper motor neuron lesion can be seen, because here why we see these features, because the connection of the upper motor neurons with the lower motor neurons is lost. So the control is lost. So we all see the features. Lower motor neurons have starting recovering. They are gaining themselves back. So we see the features of upper motor neuron lesion, and most of the time the paraplegia in extension can also be seen in some cases. A very important aspect of recovery is the mass spinal reflex. We've already discussed, when we discussed the spinal reflexes, we definitely discussed the mass spinal reflex. Again, we'll be repeating those mass spinal reflex. So if we give any stimulus to the lower part of the body, like inner thigh or lower abdomen, just a scratch, even a non-noxious stimulus, or even mild stimulus, like mild touch stimulus is applied to these parts, it leads to mass spinal effects involving larger portions of the body which are being supplied by the cord. So first of all, there will occur flexor spasm for all the major portions or of the body. Then along with this, there will be reflex contraction of bladder and bowel, and the evacuation of these occurs. Then along with this, there is increased arterial blood pressure, and the mean arterial blood pressure can even go to 200 millimeters of mercury. Initially, the blood pressure in the stage of shock can decrease to 40 millimeters of mercury. Here it can go to 200 millimeters of mercury. Along with this, there is profuse reflex sweating of the body below the transection. Now, I again repeat, can you imagine the situation? You scratch the inside of the thigh. You scratch the inside of the thigh just with a touch. You just touch a light scratch. No noxious stimulus, non-noxious stimulus. Just a mild touch, tactile stimulation to the inner side of the thigh or the lower part of the abdomen. Suddenly, you find that the person goes into flexor spasm. Can you imagine that situation? He is lying on the bed and suddenly goes into flexor spasms. Reflexly, he starts evacuating his bladder and bowel, and there is increase in blood pressure. He starts flushing, all the signs and symptoms of increased blood pressure. You can see the mean arterial pressure shoots up. Suppose it's connected to monitor, and the monitor starts showing you the higher readings, about 200 millimeters of mercury, and then his body is completely covered, his body below the lesion is completely covered by the sweat. So can you imagine? Try to imagine the situation. This is mass spinal reflex. Why do we encounter this mass spinal reflex? The reason is that the irritability or hypersensitivity of the spinal motor neurons. Initially I said that the resting membrane potential of the spinal motor neurons is about 2 to 6 millivolt higher than they become higher than the normal spinal motor neuron when in the case of spinal shock. But when they start recovering, their uh, what happens is that in, then their resting membrane potential becomes lower. So this is due to they become lower. Initially it was higher, now it becomes lower, and they become hyper excitable and their sensitivity is higher. And this is the reason that you give even in paraplegic patients to just give a scratch and there is hyper reflexia and all these hyper effect of flexor muscles is there, reflex contraction, blood pressure, sweating is there below the lesion. So irritability or hypersensitive because the threshold is low and sensitivity is more, so they show this response. So that is why we train the subject or train the patient to for stroking or pinching their thigh, so thus producing an intentional mass reflex. So we can produce an intentional mass uh, spinal spinal reflex. This is intentional. So then the bladder and bowel will empty. They will not be completely emptying, leaving some residue, but still he will be able to empty. So this is very important. As I mentioned in the previous slide, that you can produce intentional mass spinal reflex and can be used to train the patient for evacuation of bladder and bowel. Now, how will you treat such patients? Such patients can be treated, symptomatic treatment is given, adequate nutrition is maintained, the posture antibiotics are given, glucosteroids are given, proper nursing care is given. Nursing care plays the major role. We have to completely change his posture in a day 3-4 times. Then we have to exercise his or her muscles, affected muscles, give nutrition, proper care, protein rich diet. So what will happen? Extensor muscle tone will become enough in 6 months that momentarily the patient can stand. And sometimes all the positive supporting reactions can be seen. This you have learned in another competency, the positive and negative supporting reactions. So the person can recover to a but suppose the patient did not receive the proper nursing care or the patient did not receive proper nutrition, so the patient can land into third stage, which is known as stage or phase of failure. In this case, phase of reflex failure, we can say phase of reflex failure. In this, what happens is that this is irreversible. So this will occur when the general condition of the patient deteriorates. There is a lack of nutrition. The patient may land up in negative nitrogen balance. That is why I was saying that we need to give protein-rich diets. Because of lying down, he can have widespread infections. There can be septicemia, and it has been said that majority of the patients who die because of septicemia. Then because urinary stasis can also occur because the bladder is not completely evacuated. Some residual amount urine does remain in the bladder, so this can lead to urinary tract infections and moreover trophic ulcers can develop because if you don't change the posture of the patient, what will happen, that there can be bed sores or what we call as decubitus ulcers. So if the proper nursing care is not there, the person can develop trophic ulcers and because of this he can even die. One more very important thing is because he's lying down, he's not moving his muscles, his bone. So then there is increased destruction of this calcium. There is loss of calcium from the and protein loss of calcium from the bones, and this can lead to hypercalcemia, hypercalciuria. More and more of calcium is in the blood. More and more calcium will pass through the kidney. So there is hypercalciuria. You lose more calcium in the urine, but still, and the person becomes more prone to calcium stones because he is passing a lot of calcium through the kidney. So he is becomes susceptible to develop the calcium stones in the kidneys. Then what are the other effects is that the reflexes are difficult to elicit. You will not be able to elicit all the reflexes which you were like flexor withdrawal reflex, the extensor reflexes, all those reflexes you will not be able to elicit. The threshold of stimuli increases here. Initially the threshold was less, Mars reflex is completely abolished. Mars reflex is abolished, and the flaccid muscles become flaccid, and they show the wasting. The muscles become flaccid and they start showing the wasting, and sometimes even the patient can die. It can be fatal and the patient can die. Another important type of injury to the spinal cord is there is incomplete transection of the spinal cord. That is no complete transection of the spinal cord. Here, spinal cord is though gravely injured, but some of the tracts are intact. It can occur because of occlusion of blood vessels, compression of cord, injuries, etc., the trauma, fall, etc. So again, there we encounter the different clinical stages, the stage or phase of spinal shock, phase of recovery, phase of reflex failure. The same stages, the stage or phase of spinal shock as well as the stage or phase of reflex failure is same as in seeing the complete transition. But there is slight difference in the stage or phase of recovery. Here they differ from complete transition. Here first to appear is the extensor tone. Normally first to appear is the flexor tone in case of complete transection of spinal cord, but first to appear is the extensor tone. Some of why? Because some of the fibers in the lateral column tract, especially the vestibulospinal tract and reticulospinal tracts, they remain intact and they escape the injury, and both these tracts they facilitate the extensor neurons. So because of this, comparatively there is higher tone in the muscles and the person's shows paraplegia in extension. That in that case it was paraplegia in flexion, here it is paraplegia. Here, as the extensor tone was first to appear, again the extensor reflexes are first to appear than the flexor reflexes. Although flexor reflexes also appear, but first to appear are the extensor reflexes. One a very interesting reflex is Philipson reflex. I'll not go in detail. If you remember, it's okay. If you don't remember, it's again okay. Here, what happens? Then, if you extend the, there occurs extension. You of opposite limb occurs by gentle flexion of one limb. You gently flex one limb, the opposite limb it goes into extension, and then the flexed limb starts extending and the opposite flexes. This alternately goes on. Again repeat, when you gently flex one of the limbs, affected limbs, the opposite limb it shows extension, and then the previous flexed limb it extends and the extended limb it shows flexion. Alternate flexion extension of the muscles occur and limbs occur, and there is steppage sort of movements occur. Another important is extensor thrust reflex. It's again slightly difficult reflex, again you remember or not. So this is a physiological extensor response. In this, there is active contraction of quadriceps and posterior calf muscles with straightening of limb. So what happens when if you press the foot upward with the palm of the hand, you press the foot of the patient upward with the palm of the hand in a spinal patient in whom the lower limb has been passively flexed and allowed to rest on the bed. You try to press the foot upward in such a patient and we get a reflex which is called as extensor thrust reflex. That is, the limb has been passively flexed. You try to raise the foot upward with the palm of the hand and you get the extensor response. This is known as extensor thrust reflex. Then the crossed extensor reflex can also be elicited. We already know what is cross extensor reflex, but important is that Mars reflex cannot be elicited in such patients because there is not complete transection of the spinal cord. So some fibers from motor vestibulospinal reticulospinal tract, they does play a role. So then there is no Mars reflex. Another very interesting aspect is hemisection of the cord. You can call it incomplete section also. In incomplete section, I said some of the fibers, some part may remain intact. In hemisection, it is clear cut that half of the spinal cord is dissociate from the higher centers, and this is known as the Brown-Sequard syndrome. Again repeat, what is Brown-Sequard syndrome? Brown-Sequard syndrome is hemisection of the cord where only one half of the spinal cord is involved. Causes can be, there can be trauma. So almost same causes, accidental injuries, falls, stab wounds, gunshot injuries, etc. Or there can be compression of cord by intervertebral disc. There can be tumors, or experimentally it can be produced in animals. So any sort of injury which causes hemisection of the cord leads to the Brown-Sequard syndrome. So clinically, uh, two type of features you can see is that immediately and effects and the delayed effects. So immediate effects and delayed effects. Immediate effects which you see in this hemisection of the cord is same as seen in the spinal shock, which you see in the spinal shock. Now the delayed effects, it depends upon the level of the injury. It will occur at the level of the hemisection. There will be different response effects. Below the level of hemisection, different effects, and above the level of hemisection, different effects. See, the spinal, half of the spinal cord is cut, or the brain, this is Brown-Sequard. So let us talk first at the level of hemisection. What happens? It depends upon the extent of injury. If the cut is clear cut, clean cut, with no local destruction, we will see minimal effects in the patient. But if the cut is like injury, there is extensive damage, 3 or 4 segments are involved, then we can see different changes. Let's first talk of sensory changes. Now sensory changes, they can occur ipsilateral, that is then the same side, and on the contralateral side. On the ipsilateral or same side, there is complete anesthesia due to complete damage to posterior nerve root, posterior horn cells, and the spinothalamic fibers. So there is complete anesthesia on the same side. This is ipsilateral. Contralaterally, some loss of pain, temperature, and crude touch sensations, that is the sensations which are carried by the spinothalamic tracts, can be affected because these sensations, they cross. So the opposite side sensations are lost. Then some might be lost, again depends upon the level of the damage. More the segment, then only. If there is a clean cut damage, then we don't see such effects. So we were talking of sensory changes. Now the motor changes. The ipsilateral side, that is the same side, we see lower motor neuron type of paralysis, that is the hypotonia, areflexia, and this flaccidity, flaccid muscles. So there is another important is complete and permanent vasomotor loss due to damage to the intermediolateral horn cells, because the intermediolateral horn cells, which their connection to the vasomotor center is lost. So what happens? The vasomotor tone is also lost. So contralaterally, there may be no change or mild change. Mild means we can, if mild change occurs, that too we can see the lower motor neuron type of paralysis. Now this is about the above the level of hemisection. So it again, I said, depends upon the extent of injury. Now below the level of hemisection, the sensory changes, they are dissociated sensory loss or crossed anesthesia. Dissociated anesthesia or crossed anesthesia. That is, some sensations will be lost and some sensations will not be lost. Some sensation on the same side are lost and some sensation on the opposite side are lost. So this is dissociated hemianesthesia or dissociated sensory loss or crossed anesthesia. So ipsilaterally, that is on the same side, which sensations are lost. Just try to recollect which sensations are lost. Which sensation will be lost? The sensations, the fibers which don't cross, which are those fibers? The dorsal column sensations, they are lost. So fine touch, tactile localization, discrimination, vibration, conscious kinesthetic sensation, stereognosis, they are all lost. But the anterolateral column or spinothalamic sensations like crude touch, pain, temperature sensations are not lost because they cross to the opposite side. They cross to the opposite side. Now try to understand this. I am talking of the same side. Suppose the right side of the cord is cut. The right sided part will lose all the fine touch, tactile localization, tactile discrimination, vibration, position, kinesthetic sensation, stereognosis, and the opposite side, pain, crude touch, and temperature will be lost. But the same side, then what happens to the contralateral side? This is very interesting. I told you that there is dissociated anesthesia or dissociated hemianesthesia. Here on the opposite side, I was saying that suppose on the right side there is hemisection. So let us talk on the left side. What will happen? The anterolateral or spinothalamic sensations will be lost. They will be lost because they cross to the right side, and right side there is injury. The fibers are not going up, so they are lost. But the dorsal column sensations are not lost because there is no injury. They don't cross, they pass in the same side. So the and the so again I repeat, the sensory changes on the same side. There is loss of the fine touch, tactile localization, discrimination, position, conscious kinesthetic sensation, vibration, and stereognosis, while the the crude touch, pain, temperature of opposite side are lost. While on the opposite side, the crude touch, pain are they are not they are lost, while the dorsal column sensations are intact. While talking of motor changes, ipsilaterally there will be upper motor neuron type of paralysis because the connection of the upper motor neuron with the low motor neuron is lost, so you will get hypertonia. So what will be there? There will be hypertonia, there will be hyperreflexia, and exaggerated reflexes are there, rigidity, and contralaterally no changes in the, and sometimes because sometimes we can see the upper motor neuron type of lesion, but rarely there are any changes can be seen in this. Now ipsilaterally, if we talk of this another very important thing is vasomotor changes. In this case what happens, vasomotor changes also occur. There is temporary loss of vasomotor tone because, and this leads to dilatation of blood vessels and decrease in blood pressure. And recovery occurs due to functioning of the intermedial lateral horn cells. So initially the intermedial lateral horn cells, they lost their connections with the higher motor center, vasomotor center, and they lost their tone. But after some time the recovery occurs and there is functioning of this intermedial lateral horns, they recover, and then the blood pressure comes back to normal. Now above the level of hemisection, we talked of at the level of hemisection, we talked of below the level of hemisection. Now we'll be talking above the level of hemisection. So there is not much of the changes, but some of the changes still can be seen. So the sensory changes ipsilaterally, you will be seeing the band of hyperesthesia, that is increase cutaneous sensations in one or two segments above the injury cause of the irritation of the posterior roots above. Contralaterally, what you will see no changes or mild referred hyperesthesia can be seen. Basically no changes. So slight band of hyperesthesia in because of in one or two segments, and contralaterally almost nil changes or no changes. Motor changes ipsilaterally, slight twitching of muscles in upper 1 to 2 segments can be seen, and contralaterally no changes. Almost motor changes are nil in the lesion above the area above the syringomyelia. Why the name is like the here the fluid filled cavity, or what we call as cystic cavity or syrinx is there. So it's a rare disease. That is why the name is syringomyelia. So here this is a rare disease. This is a rare disease. Let us see, this is the syringomyelia. Here the cavitation in grey matter occurs, and uh, here the it leads to finally it leads to gliosis, that is overgrowth, excessive overgrowth of neuroglia, that is the supporting cells, and they replace the neuronal cells around the central canal. Central canal widens, affecting the fibers passing. Now, very important is that syringomyelia can be communicating and non-communicating. Communicating is it communicates with the the ventricles, and then non-communicating just the cystic cavity filling the spaces. So I'll not be discussing much of the detail of the syringomyelia because it's again a long lecture, but it's not important for as far as phase 1 MBBS students are concerned. I'll be just restricting. So again repeat, syringomyelia is a rare disease. It's why we call it because it is fluid filled cavity is there, or syrinx is there, and there is cavitation in grey matter, and this cavity starts enlarging, the central canal starts enlarging, and there is because of this there can be gliosis, that is excessive overgrowth of neuroglia, that is reactionary overgrowth is there, and this may replace the neuronal cells especially around the central canal, and the central canal widens, affecting the fibers. So fibers which are crossing here, they will be affected, and syringomyelia can be communicating and non-communicating. So it mainly, if it has been seen that syringomalia mainly affects the cervical region, and the symptoms are seen in areas supplied by the cervical nerve roots. So clinical features, if you see, clinical features are bilaterally seen here. See, this is the cystic fluid filled cystic cavity, what we call as syrinx, and that is why the syringomalia. The sensory changes are dissociated anesthesia, and first to be affected is there is the uh, this fibers which cross to the opposite side. So loss of spinothalamic tract sensations are lost. So, and the pain, crude touch and temperature are lost. And since the dorsal column tracts, they do not cross, so they are not lost, but later on, later stages when there is severe disease, they may be lost, but they are not lost. Basically the tracts, the fibers which cross, which belong to pain, crude and touch, and they are lost. So there is dissociated anesthesia. And the motor changes, when motor changes occur, it is mainly the lower motor neuron type of paralysis we see, but as the cavitation occurs, as the reactionary gliosis also occur, and the anterior horn cells are also affected, so we can see later on the upper motor neuron type of paralysis can also be seen in the case of syringomyelia. How you are going to treat? Syringomyelia basically doesn't have any treatment. We need to give the physiotherapy to the patient, symptomatic relief, and we have to maintain the patient so that so the patient's life is prolonged in a healthy way. Now there are many other sensory disturbances also. We have discussed in detail. I'll be like we have discussed already tabes dorsalis, subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord, then herpes zoster we discussed, multiple sclerosis we discussed, anesthesia we discussed, sensory ataxia. So you need to remember, you need to revise those, and then recollect the things. All the best.